This Day in Sports History. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History. It is August 7th, and on this day in 1938, well before the use of instant replay, an umpire reversed his call on the field. Now, this was Game 2 of a doubleheader between the Cincinnati Reds and the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field. And one interesting thing that I found out that I had no knowledge of before I started looking into the story is that Babe Ruth had been hired by the Dodgers in June of 1938 to coach first base. He was still a huge draw wherever he went, and he expressed a desire to one day be a manager at some point in the big leagues. But Dodgers owner Larry McPhail told him bluntly that he would not be considered for the manager's role when Burleigh Grimes retired at the end of the season. He'd already pegged Dodger captain Leo DeRocher to take over for Grimes. Now, all of those guys would figure into what happened in this one. Now, I couldn't find exactly when this happened in the game, but at some point, DeRocher came up to the plate and hit a fly ball to deep left. Did it clear the railing, or did a fan reach over and snag it? That was the question. Third base umpire Larry Getz ruled it a home run, and that caused Reds acting manager Hank Gowdy to come out and protest the call, arguing that the fan had reached over into the field of play and interfered with it. Getz and Gowdy marched out to the wall, and they had a discussion. When Getz walked back to the infield, he reversed his ruling to fan interference and instead of a home run, called it a ground rule double and put DeRocher on second. Well, Dodgers manager Burleigh Grimes had a thing or two to say about that, and he and DeRocher argued the changed call, but to no avail, the changed call stood. Now, I'm not exactly sure what caused Getz to change his mind, what evidence that he may have found out in left field that gave him that overwhelming proof that, yeah, a fan had reached over into the field of play. But the call stood, and Grimes returned to the first base coaching box, where he was working that game in place of the Babe, who'd been ejected in the first game of the doubleheader and was not eligible to coach in the second one. Before Reds pitcher Peaches Davis threw another pitch, Grimes pulled out a red bandana handkerchief from his back pocket and covered his face in the manner of a Stagecoach bandit in protest of the call. The fans at Ebbets Field erupted in laughter, but home plate umpire Beans Reardon did not see the humor in the gesture and tossed Grimes for the sixth time that season. This episode is brought to you by Firefly Books, and with you being a sports fan just like me, here's 2 suggestions for your next great sports read. If you love basketball, then you need to add Dave Zarum's book, NBA 75, The Definitive History. Uncover untold stories of triumph, controversy, and the greatest stars of the game. From the league's humble beginnings to its modern glory, it is a courtside seat to 75 years of NBA history. And if you're a golf fanatic, then you gotta check out Matt Adams' book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget. I've used it as a reference in this podcast over the past year for lots of stories that I've done, and I can tell you from experiencing it, this is a great book. Relive 50 of golf's most memorable moments through the eyes of the legends themselves. It's the closest you'll ever get to walking the fairways with the greatest to ever play the game. Grab your copy of NBA 75 or The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, available from Firefly, wherever you get your books. On this day in 1954, it was the Mile of the Century race featuring Roger Bannister and John Landy. It was one of the most anticipated foot races in the history of man. And listen, I may go a little bit heavy on the hyperbole on occasion, but I don't think I'm really doing that with this particular event. And even if you have not heard about this race, it was an extremely important event. So 1954 was a huge year for running, and the mile in particular. Roger Bannister had broken the barrier on the 4-minute mile back in May, and the man chasing him for the record, albeit on the other side of the world, had been John Landy, and he had been the second man to run a sub-4 mile, doing it in June. Now, Landy also had bested Bannister's time, running 3 minutes 57.9 seconds. But they had been running and chasing the same goal on different tracks far from each other. They had never competed against each other. Bannister was in England, Landy mostly in Australia. And despite having been the first to run a sub-4 mile and all the accolades that go with that, Bannister still felt he had something to prove, and that was in a head-to-head race with Landy. Now on this day, the two runners were on the same track in the Commonwealth Games. Athletes from countries that the Brits had colonized and still were listed under the Commonwealth came together for an Olympic-style competition. In '54, the Games were held in Vancouver, Canada. Now, there was one exception that the Games organizers were actually willing to make for this particular race, and that was an invitation extended to American Wes Santee, who had also been involved in the chase for the sub-4 mile while he was a student athlete on the track team at Kansas. At this point, though, Santee was in the U.S. Army, and his request for leave to go compete in the Games was denied. At the last minute, he was allowed to provide commentary on a broadcast of the event, but he was always left with that what-if question for the rest of his life. Now, 30,000 people packed the stadium, with an estimated 10 million more watching on television all over the world. Now, this is 1954. A single television was in only about half the households around the world at this point. So that's a lot of eyeballs on this race. Of course, there were other track and field events going on, but everybody's interest was on the mile run. And it wasn't just these two lining up. There were other participants, but everybody knew that this race was really going to come down to Roger Bannister and John Landy. Now, interestingly, Landy had actually cut his foot the night before. He had been unable to sleep with the anticipation of this race weighing on his mind, and he went out for a walk barefoot, and he stepped on a photographer's shattered flashbulb. It only took about 4 stitches to close the wound, but you can imagine a cut on the bottom of your foot, when you're actually running, it's going to cause you some pain. Now, he never used it as an excuse, and he actually swore the doctor to secrecy about the injury. There was no consideration of backing out of the race whatsoever. He knew this was his one chance to prove he was faster than Bannister. Now, both men had a style. Landy liked to run out front and set the pace. Bannister liked to settle in and then explode in the final 100 with a devastating kick. On the first lap, Landy worked through a little traffic to take the lead between turns 3 and 4. He then cranked up the speed to a blistering pace. He ran the first quarter mile in 58.1 seconds. At the halfway mark, Landy had about a 10-yard lead, and he looked like a sure winner. But Bannister didn't panic, sticking to his pre-race strategy. Here he is talking about that race just a few months before he died in 2018.
He was someone with greater stamina, but on the other hand, I had a better finish. So I had to ensure that he took the lead and tried to exhaust me.
220 yards to go, and I don't believe Bannister's going to be able to catch him. Landy is running beautifully. No, Bannister's coming up on him now. 150 yards to go, and Bannister is gaining ever so slightly with each stride. 130 yards to go, and Bannister is coming up to Landy's elbow. Bannister has passed Landy, and he comes into the straight, and it's going to be Bannister's race. Landy is flagging, I think. Here comes Bannister, sliding absolutely magnificently. He's got a lead of 2 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards, about 15 yards to go, and Bannister breasts the tape now, and Landy second, about 3 yards behind.
Now, as they rounded that final turn, Bannister surged past on Landy's right shoulder as Landy looked over his left. It's an iconic image that was captured in a photo that day, and it's been turned into prints and a bronze statue depicting the precise moment when Bannister wrested control of the race away from the Australian. The Englishman powered home in the final 100 to win with a time of 3 minutes 58.8 seconds, and Landy crossed in 3 minutes 59.6 seconds. It was the first time that two men had run sub-4-minute miles in the same race, but Bannister had won the mile of the century. He retired from racing later that year to concentrate on his career as a physician. Landy went back to Australia, and the two men never raced each other again. On this day in 2016, it was Jim Furyk setting a new record for lowest round in a PGA Tour event. This was the first round of the Travelers Championship at the TPC River Highlands in Connecticut. The 46-year-old Furyk, the man with the funky swing, made the turn with a 27, just one off the PGA record of 26 set by Corey Pavin. He had 7 consecutive birdies and was 11 under after 11 holes. He cooled off just a little bit on the way home. He missed 2 short birdie putts, one on 14 and another on 15, and the one at 15 actually horseshoed on him. He wound up with 10 birdies and an eagle on the day. He hit every green in regulation and had an amazingly low 24 putts to shoot a 58. He was actually staring at a 57 on 18, but his birdie putt slid by just a few inches on the right. When he tapped in for his par, and the lowest round ever recorded in a PGA Tour event, Furyk turned and hugged his caddy, Fluff Cowan, who'd seen a lot of good rounds in his journeys around the links with Tiger. Furyk's furious rally did not give him the winner's check, though. He had to shoot a 66 on Friday just to make the cut on the number. A Saturday 73 pushed him into an early tee time on Sunday. His final tally of 11 under was only good for a tie for 5th. Furyk is the only player in PGA history to have 2 sub-60 rounds. He had shot a 59 3 years prior in the 3rd round of the BMW Championship. This episode is brought to you by Sterling Roastery. For several months you've heard me talking about the great products and scents offered by the Sterling Soap Company. And while there may not seem to be any correlation between soap and coffee, what is similar is the same care and attention to detail in delivering great products to their customers. Sterling Roastery will ship great-tasting beans or ground coffee, for whatever coffee-making process you prefer, right to your door. I gave their breakfast blend a try recently, and I can tell you, it was a great way to get my day kick-started with this smooth, medium blend. And just like their soaps, they have a variety to choose from. Give Sterling Roastery a try at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1956, Ted Williams was booed by the home crowd at Fenway Park, and he did not take it so well. The Red Sox were hosting the New York Yankees, and at this point in the season, Boston was still mathematically in contention, but were 8.5 games behind the first-place Yankees, and things were looking a little bleak for the Sox. This game went to extra innings, scoreless after 9. In the top of the 11th, with 2 outs, Williams got a late start on a ball hit by Mickey Mantle, and he dropped it. Mantle wound up on second and represented the go-ahead run. The capacity crowd of more than 36,000 started booing Williams. The next batter was Yogi Berra, and he had a ball to left center. Williams made a spectacular play to record the 3rd out and preserve the tie game. But even after that, as Williams trotted back to the dugout, the boos drowned out the cheers, and those boos were all directed at Williams. As he got close to the dugout steps, Williams reared his head back and spat towards the crowd. Now, nothing from the accounts that I read indicate anyone got sprayed, but the intent was clear. And just in case anybody there did not get the message, Williams came out of the dugout a few seconds later and spat towards the crowd again. The Sox loaded the bases in the bottom of the 11th, and when Williams drew a walk, his 2nd of the day, the winning run trotted home. Boston had won, and it was their 6th win in 7 games. When reporters interviewed the splendid splinter turned splendid spitter after his actions, Williams was unapologetic, saying, "I'm not a bit sorry for what I did. I was right, and I'd spit again at the same fans who booed me today. Some of them are the worst in the world. Nobody's going to stop me from spitting." Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey was in New York that day and had been listening to Mel Allen's Yankee broadcast. When he heard Allen's description of the event, he called Red Sox GM Joe Cronin, who fined Williams $5,000 for the spitting incident, which was 5% of his annual salary. Boston would win the next 3 games but could not gain any more ground on the Yankees and finished 4th in the American League. Now, I would imagine the boos they heard on this day were not the last ones they heard that season. On this day in 1928, Olympic rower Bobby Pearce paused to allow a family of ducks to safely pass before continuing his race. It was the quarterfinal round of the men's single sculls event, with the Australian Pearce going up against France's Vincent Serrant. Shortly after the start of the 2,000-meter heat race, fans along the canal alerted Pearce about a family of ducks in the water directly in front of his boat. Now, of course, in rowing, and sculls specifically, you're facing the opposite way you're going, so, he'd never would have seen them. Pearce slowed down and waited for the ducks to safely pass. Meanwhile, Serrant kept paddling, gaining a substantial lead. But Pearce calmly rowed his way back up to Serrant, caught him at the halfway point, passed him, and beat him by more than 30 seconds to advance to the semifinals and eventually the finals, where he won the gold medal a few days later. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Here's a pleasant little coincidence for you. Nacho cheese gets its meltiness from adding sodium citrate, which is a type of salt that lowers the acidity in cheese. The chemical formula for sodium citrate is Na3C6H5O7. Now, if you remove the numbers, that spells nacho.
Say what?
Now, this is not how nachos got their name. Instead, nachos were invented by a creative guy named Ignacio Nacho Anaya. When weary travelers walked into his restaurant after the kitchen had closed, instead of turning them away, he put some tortilla chips on a plate, melted some cheese over the top, and added some jalapenos, and the dish was named after him. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.